Hey everybody, what's going on? It'll probably take everybody a minute to join because I've only got like 80 followers or something like that on Twitch anyway. But hello to everybody happening by. Got my bot account come by, but yeah, we'll probably have a handful of folks drop by. But for those watching the VOD later, I'm Ian Douglas. I'm a senior developer advocate at Postman, and I am joined by my buddy Dan up in Boulder, just a stone's throw away, who is the head of developer relations over at FusionAuth. And today we're going to nerd out on some auth, and we're going to add some auth to an API that I wrote for pulling out a dad joke. And I haven't done this kind of auth in a long, long time. So I'm excited to kind of see and explore what FusionAuth has available and what we can build into an API. So Dan, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and help us understand like what we're going to get into today.
Sure. So, hi, I'm Dan Moore, head of DevRel at FusionAuth. Thank you for having me, Ian. And today we're gonna just kind of explore a variety of different ways to authenticate against an API, or sorry, to authenticate so that you can make a call against an API. And just to be totally clear, FusionAuth can be used a lot of different ways. This particular path is going to require a license, so it does cost some money. I'm not charging Ian, don't worry about that. But
It's all right. I'm charging Dan, so no, just kidding.
but there are other ways to do this, but I thought this would be an interesting exploration because it is kind of super API focused. So
yeah, awesome. Sweet. So a typical thing with FusionAuth would be like you want to implement like login with Google kind of thing. Like, is that typically what FusionAuth would be for?
yeah, great question. So FusionAuth can be used in a lot of different ways. One way we find a lot of people use is they want a centralized IDP for their customers. IDP stands for identity provider. So they have one place for all their customers to live, all their customer data that's safe and secure and is made by people who do this stuff for a living. And then they sometimes will federate in with other providers, like login with Google, Twitter. We support video game providers, or SAML or OAuth in more of a B2B scenario. We have other people who just use everything inside FusionAuth and don't federate out. So either one works. Really depends on your use case.
Yeah. And what does it mean to be federated? Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So the idea with federation is really who owns the user data, like who owns that password, who owns what's the source of truth. So if you have the scenario where FusionAuth lives here and then there's Google over here, and someone clicks on login with Google, who owns the password and the user data? Google does. Google will send stuff back to FusionAuth, and then FusionAuth has maybe some auxiliary data or whatnot, but the source of truth really is Google. Whereas other times FusionAuth is the source of truth. And the confusing thing is actually different users within the same system can have different federation or no federation at all.
So, and the information that you're getting back in this example from Google is similar to what I would say, like if if I'm going into the office and I like have my little pass card in my wallet and I like tap that against the wall to let me in, that pass card is effectively what Google is giving to FusionAuth to like maybe do something on my behalf, like maybe go check my email or something. But in this case, that's more of like an OAuth path. But in this case, FusionAuth is just handling like who are you and not necessarily the authorization of what you're allowed to do at that point. Is that right?
I mean, the way you configure FusionAuth, you actually tell it which scopes you want it to ask Google for.
Right.
Scopes is a fancy word for permissions.
Yeah.
And Google will hand back an access token, which is like that pass card. FusionAuth doesn't do anything on behalf of you against Google, but you can actually, your application can query FusionAuth and say, hey, give me that token. I want to go read Ian's calendar or whatnot. But by default, it's just Google says, hey, Ian is
who he says he is. Yeah.
And we're going to store stuff off and then send you on your way.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So it's a much simpler flow than the typical kind of OAuth kind of pattern. Cool. So what are we going to get into by building this into an API? So I do a lot of work with APIs, building out little APIs, and I've got a dad joke API that I like to use. How are we going to incorporate authentication into this using FusionAuth?
Yeah, so what I thought would be interesting was to set things up so that your dad joke API is an OAuth entity, and then we can do the client credentials grant against that API. And so you will have your dad joke API will create another caller, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
it could be a user who calls it. Actually, let's do another caller, and we're going to have FusionAuth issue the token to the caller, and then present that to the dad joke API, and then
Okay.
that dad joke API will validate that that caller actually has permissions to call the dad joke, and then it
Okay.
will return the dad joke. Is the idea.
Okay.
So I know you do a lot of like API stuff. Like there's multiple ways to authenticate against API, right? So API key. I don't know what other common ways there are, but no, what's that? Basic auth. This
Mm-hmm.
is the more complicated kind of OAuth flow
Okay.
for authenticating against the API. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yep.
Does that seem fun?
Yeah. Sounds fine. Yeah. Let's do it.
Great.
Cool. All right. So I've got my code editor up and running here. This is just a very simple dad joke where I've just got a single route, goes and it fetches a random joke and just returns it back in JSON format. I've got it deployed using Google Cloud, and we can just hit this with a curl endpoint, and it just gives us a simple joke from here. So to add authentication into this, we're going to need something a little more in depth as far as like going through the OAuth sort of step-by-step kind of thing. So I imagine I'm going to have to build in some like callbacks and things like that into the API as we go. Maybe I'll pull up Postman or whatever to like walk through that. Yeah, so how would we get started from here? So Dan, as Dan mentioned, this is part of a paid portion of using FusionAuth, and so he's already got me set up with a license for this. But how do I get started in FusionAuth?
Yeah, so for this particular case, I'd probably you already logged into the admin screen, which is awesome. And one thing that's worth noting is that this is a hosted version, again, that I'm giving to Ian gratis.
Yeah.
You can stand up your own FusionAuth Community Edition, run it yourself for free. You can go to FusionAuth and download it, FusionAuth.io, and download it if you want. But entity management is the place we want to go first. So if you go to click on entity management, that screen, yep, and let's create an entity type. And let's create an API entity type. So if we go to add, yep. So let's call it API. You might ideal be auto-generated for you. It's just going to be a GUID.
Oh, okay. For the ID, you mean?
Yeah, so I'd leave that blank,
Okay.
and then just put APIs or something like that in the. Okay, and then let's add some permissions. So what are common permissions you might want against an API or this particular API? I can think of one. Maybe there's others. I don't know.
I mean, if we wanted to like filter what kind of joke it was or something like that, but I think for now we'll just do like just you can access a joke or not.
Awesome. Okay, so let's just add one, which is just read.
Okay.
I think you're gonna want it to not. Maybe the description is. I don't really want spaces in there. I think you're gonna want.
Okay, so just joke for the name and then description.
Yeah, description is free form, so
user can get a single joke.
Cool.
Okay.
And do we need anything else? I don't think we do. Okay, let's hit save. Great. Now let's go ahead and create two types of APIs.
Okay.
So we go to entities, and let's create one that's the dad joke API.
Can this have spaces or do dashes or something?
The name can be whatever you want. Yep.
Okay. Okay, so dad joke API. And then we'll choose API from the list.
Yep.
Okay. And then you said add a second one?
Yeah, let's add a caller because again, this is all about like permissions. So we have a caller and we're going to give them the permission on the dad joke API. And then FusionAuth is going to be able to manage that for us. And it won't issue that token if this caller doesn't have permission. So we could actually add a third one that is like caller who can't call dad joke or something like that.
Oh, okay. So both of these were set up with the same entity type.
Yep.
So one is like the API side and the other is the user side. Is that why we have like the dad joke API and caller?
Yeah, so you could think that caller is going to be like a developer who's signing up to like get access to the dad joke API. Right, so they go through developer portal and they're registering themselves.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
So let's go ahead and add a grant from the caller to the dad joke API, right? Because that's the benefit here is that we can manage permissions inside FusionAuth, and then we have less complexity inside your API, right? Because it can just say, I got a valid JOT. I still should do some checks on it, but I will never get a JOT if FusionAuth doesn't know that I have access to call the dad joke.
Okay. All right. Cool.
So
Sounds good.
the UI is a little intuitive. Under action, there's a little black button on the caller. I think we want to do that.
The manage.
Yep, manage.
Okay.
And then let's add a grant over there. It's the green add button. And let's search for the dad joke. And by the way, we're doing all this via the UI, but this is all scriptable for sure.
Okay.
So
Give that permission.
Yep, save it.
Save. Okay.
Great. All right. So with curl, we can actually now run through the client credentials grant. That might be the easiest thing to do. Let me what's the best way to chat you something? Ian, I'm new to this platform.
You can send it over video. There's a chat.
There it is.
Yep.
Awesome.
I'm just gonna drop the link for the dad joke API here. Hey Whip, good to see you in chat. All right, so this URL that you sent me, how do I just access this using curl over here?
Yeah. Oh no, that's just a public. That's just documentation. So that just walks us through the curl steps.
Okay.
Or not so much the curl steps actually. Yeah. So what we would want is to darn it, that is not actually it's not curl. So let's build the we're gonna build the request to FusionAuth that this client is that the caller is going to make to get the token, and then we can take that token and pass it in the authorization header to your API, and then that API can check to see whether that token's good or not.
Cool.
But let's change one more thing actually. You're using Python. No, actually we don't need to right now. We'll cross the bridge when we come to it.
Okay.
So let's run the curl script, which is going to be a post against your FusionAuth OAuth 2 endpoint. So whatever your URL is for your FusionAuth instance, and then /OAuth2/token.
Okay, so where do I get that instance ID?
It's just in the URL.
This whole thing up here?
It's just the host name.
Oh, just the host part. Okay.
Yep.
Yep. And do I need anything else, or just a post?
We will need more stuff, but let's just do /OAuth2/token real quick.
/OAuth2/token. Okay.
Yep. And
invalid.
So we're missing a bunch of stuff, right?
Yeah.
No surprise. So now we want to put in the grant type of client credentials. So I'm just gonna paste this in for you. Chat message. And that can be a URL parameter. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is the scope. And again, this is going to be a little bit different. This is going to be you can't cut and paste that. It's actually going to be the IDs in here are actually going to be the IDs of the dad joke API.
Okay.
So we want to go back to FusionAuth to get that API and get the scope we want, which is we're requesting dad joke API. So yeah, let's go to entities actually.
Entities, okay.
Okay, and so we can see the dad joke API. That's the ID we want. Because basically this is the request the caller's making and saying, hey, can I get access to the dad joke API at all?
Okay.
So that's the ID. And then our scope is going to be what was it? Just joke, I think.
Yeah, it was just joke. So how do I add this? So the ID that I copied over here, that's not the scope. That's just the ID. How do I add that to like my my URL here? Is that?
Yep. So it's you're gonna do nope. You actually just do yeah. So it's scope equals and then target entity, and then colon,
Oops, entity colon. Okay.
And then the ID that you just copied, right? And then colon. And then
and then the word joke or whatever.
Yep. And you may want to put all this in a single quote. Like, I don't know whether the ampersands will get.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yep, in bash. Yep.
Yep.
We will need quotes around that for sure.
Cool.
Okay, missing client ID.
Okay, so now what we need to do is actually, so we've got the request that says, hey, dad joke API, this is what I want to do with you, but we haven't identified ourselves. And so we're going to do that with basic auth, which is defined as part of the client credentials grant. And that's going to be the, I think with curl, it's easier to use, curl basic. I always have to Google for this.
Me too.
It is going to be
dash basic, I think.
Or I think you can actually just do even easier dash.
Dash u user.
Yep, login password. Where our login ID, again, because we're representing ourselves as this caller object, this caller entity, the login ID is the client ID of the caller, and then the password is the client secret of the caller.
Okay. All right, so let me get out of here. We'll go back to this, and we will just do dash u. Now, the login and password that I'm doing here, this is actually my FusionAuth username and password.
Nope, this is because remember, we're pretending we're the caller right now.
Oh, okay.
Right? So it's the caller entity.
So it can just be anything I want, really.
No, because you have to go back to the FusionAuth admin screen.
Okay.
And if you click on the preview link, the green magnifying glass over there, on the not the dad joke API, but on the caller, that'll show you the client ID and the client secret. So it's the client ID is the login, and the password is the client secret.
Oh, okay, I got you. And these are all temporary, and they're going to get torn down later anyway, so I'm not too worried about that on the live stream. Sweet. All right, so we got our access token.
So let's change that from being joke to like update joke or something like that. That last scope.
Yeah, permission is invalid. Sweet.
We're denied, right?
Yep.
So in theory, you have a more complicated API. You're going to have different scopes that you might want to let different sets of people have different access to.
Wow, cool. It's been pretty simple so far. That's great.
Cool. So now, this is like two-step, right? Like the first part of calling the API, and this would probably be wrapped in an SDK, right? In your in a production environment. But first step is to talk to FusionAuth and say, hey, here's who I am. Here's what I want to do. FusionAuth will say yes or no, and then you are going to take the access token. If it says yes, you take the access token out, and then you present it to the Flask API.
Okay.
And now let's go ahead and add that check to the Flask API.
Okay. So now when I fetch a joke, part of me wants to actually set up these first couple of calls in Postman too, and do like a collection runner or something like that.
Yeah,
so I'm just gonna go do that real quick. Since I'm on the clock, I'm gonna go do Postman.
I've played on it a little bit with Postman, but this is gonna be cool to.
Yeah. All right, so I'm just gonna go into my work sandbox and I'm just gonna add it in here. So I'm gonna add a new collection and I'm just gonna call this dad jokes. And I'm going to call this like without auth. And I'm going to paste in, let's see, it's in here somewhere. There it is. So this is the dad joke API just kind of on its own. Swords will never go obsolete. They are cutting edge technology. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to add a new request in here that is basically going to go get FusionAuth credentials or access token. We'll call it access token.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you're getting the access token from FusionAuth is the way I'd put it. Like get the access token from FusionAuth. Because
Okay, so from FusionAuth. All right, and this is going to be a post operation. And the nice thing about Postman actually is I can go grab this whole curl command. And there's a way to import this directly into here. I just got to remember how. Add example. Nope. remember how to do it. There is an import from. Oh, nope, that's not it. So what I did in Postman is I went up to import, and you go to raw text, and you just paste in that curl command. And it's like, oh, here you go. Here's everything you need. You go ahead and import that, and it just popped everything in here for you. Here's your grant type, here's your scope, and so on. Now, these values we could grab as like environment variables or things like that, but it basically built all that out for us, and we're ready to go here.
And it looks like it took care of the authorization. It wasn't just the parameters, it took care of the authorization too.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep. All right, cool. So I'm gonna close. Let's see. I'm gonna not save that one. I do want to save this one. But it made the name enormous, so save this, and I'm gonna call this get access token from Fusion inside of dad jokes. Okay, so there's our post operations. Now I can delete this other one. And so yeah, so we got everything we need. The authorization came in, we got the username, we got the password, so it already pulled out the basic auth and it loaded all this stuff up for us, built out the other parameters that we needed as far as our grant type and our scope. So yeah, it's really handy with Postman. It's like, oh, we got a curl command, sweet, let's just pull that straight in here. I can go ahead and send this over, and there's a new access token ready for us. And what I could do from here is go write some JavaScript code that says, go extract all of this and save this for the next call that we're about to do. I'm going to go do that real quick. So in Postman, I can come down here and say, if I get a 200, then we're going to go extract this thing. So I'm going to say, let data equals pm.response.json. And then I can say, let access token equal. And this is coming in something called access token. So I can just say data.access token. I can console log it for good measure. And if I send this over and go down to my console down here, we can see that it found that. So now what I want to do is I want to store that in like my environment or something like that. So back in my test code, oops, I'm just going to do like pm.environment.set, and we'll just call this like FA for FusionAuth, and we'll call it like access token, and we're going to set this to access token. Now when I run it, it's going to complain because I don't have an environment set. So I need to go build a quick environment. I'm just going to call this live stream for now. I'm not going to add anything to it, but I do need to create one. And now I can pick that from here. So now if I come in here and I send this over, I go view that, now we see that the access token got saved in there for us. Nice. Cool. All right, so we're good to go in Postman. Now I've got that access token accessible, that we can continue to do other things from here. So I'm going to save these and close these out. All right, so what's next for us? We got our access token. What do we do from here? We got to add some code.
The API, right?
Okay. So
the first thing we want to do is decide on how we want to present that token to the API. A common way to do is to use the authorization header and then just have a space and then bearer space authorization colon bearer space and then the token name.
Okay.
Or the token value, not the token name. Sorry. But it's your API, so you can do it however you want.
Yeah, we'll grab it from a header. So what would be a good way to sort of read that out? Or sort of, well, I mean, that's just going to show up as part of what we're getting as our endpoint, right?
At a request. Yep.
Okay.
So first thing we should, I mean, I'm not as familiar with Flask as with other solutions, but like I assume there's some way you can run something. Well, we only have one route right here, so let's just put it all in one route. Where we're going to check and say, what do we have an authorization header? And then if we don't have an authorization header, we should 401, and then
so we can do something like token equals request dot headers dot get, and then we can tell it like what do we want that header to be called, and we can call this whatever we want basically at this point, right? So we'll call it we'll just call it like FA access or something like that.
Sure. So I mean, typically people use authorization as
Okay.
the header name, but I mean, I think you can call it whatever you want, but
Yeah.
um,
We'll stick with industry standards here. And then we can say like, if I don't have a token, then I can return, just a string that says like, no funny, haha for you, no access.
and then you probably should figure out a way to return a 401 because
Okay.
I'm again, how Flask return 401.
Yep. I'm pretty sure we just add that as a parameter on the end of that return statement here.
Oh yeah, comma 401.
Yep.
You're right.
Cool. So if we don't have that token, we'll just return no funny haha for you, no access. We'll give them back a 401. Otherwise, we'll go on and we'll randomly pick that. Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, I got to do all that again. Okay. So it's going to go through. It's going to build that out. So from here, then, how do we tell Python to then go check in with FusionAuth to make sure that this is valid?
Yeah, because you're right. That first step is the good first step for checking. But obviously, we want to just not take any token because anyone could just do anything.
Send anything at all. Yeah.
Totally. So there's two ways to do this with JSON Web Tokens, which is what the access token is created. The first is you actually can call it to FusionAuth and say, "Hey, I have a token here. Is this valid?" We tend not to recommend that because the whole point of JSON Web Tokens is that they are kind of self-contained, so you can actually validate it without calling out to FusionAuth. And I think there's PyJWT, looks like is the first library that kind of showed up for me. So I think we want to add that. And it has a way to decode a token and it will do that check for you. Okay. So that might be an interesting thing for us to add to that.
Cool. Well, let's go add PyJWT. I'm just going to cancel this build for now. And we'll do source vn, and we'll do a pip3 install PyJWT. All right, so that's in there. So now we can basically go back over here and we import AWT. And let's see. So we already have the JSON Web Token coming in, and so yeah, that just looking at the at what we saw here. If you're curious about what this actually is, there's actually a website called, is it like
we have one on our own site, but jbt.io is the common one.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. So you can come in here and you can literally just paste it in here, and it'll unpack everything for you. It'll say this is what you had. Here's your scope. That whole bit. So yeah, we just need.
Actually, sorry, this is just really. I say this every time I do talk about JSON Web Tokens. It's really important for you to understand that like anything in a JSON Web Token, anybody, if they run across it, they can look at it. Right? They can't change the contents of it, but they can look at it. So
the whole idea of JSON Web Tokens is it's packing all this data and it's fingerprinting it, as I recall, like several times over to make sure that the data inside is not being manipulated. So yeah, anybody can decode it, anybody can read it, but they can't do anything with that data because as part of the unpacking, you can detect whether it's been tampered with. So it doesn't.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say it doesn't keep anything secret, but it will keep it from being tampered with. So, go ahead.
There is another kind of JSON Web Token that does encrypt the contents, but they're pretty. I haven't seen it super common. It's much more common to just be signed. So
yeah, cool. All right, so in here, so we don't have to necessarily check the FusionAuth. Like we don't have to check in with FusionAuth to say like this is what I got. Is it valid? We could, but what you're saying is that's not recommended. So what we can do is just a decode of that token, basically. So we're getting our token in here, a comment off, and then this will need like a secret of some kind, I guess, as well as like which algorithm it used and so on.
So real quick, talking about the secret, there's two main ways to sign a JSON Web Token. The first is with a symmetric key, and this is where FusionAuth knows the secret, and so does the Flask API. And that's really great if kind of everything's internal and you want a lot of speed and you don't have trouble deploying things. The other is with a asymmetric key where FusionAuth has the private key and you have access to the public key.
Okay.
So typically it's simpler to show the symmetric situation. So I'm happy to do that one, or we could do the asymmetric key. It's kind of up to you.
Yeah, we can do the first one. That'd be fine.
Great. Okay. So let's go ahead and grab the secret out of FusionAuth.
All right. So let's head back over to FusionAuth. Okay.
Okay. And you want to go close that out, go to Keymaster.
Not the gatekeeper. Got Ghostbusters in my head now.
Actually, sorry, real quick. Let's look at the go to the entity type real quick. And click on API and click on the edit button, which is the little pencil, blue pencil. And
enable this.
I think that it says that if you don't use the, it's hard for me to read. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. It says this is the entity type specific configuration for the JSON Web Token signing algorithm and related settings. This configuration is optional, may be left unconfigured. If no JWT configuration is provided for this entity type, then the JWT signing algorithm and related settings specified in the tenant configuration will be used to sign and verify.
Cool. So let's go ahead and I just wanted to make sure I knew what was happening. So let's go to the tenant configuration.
Okay, so tenants.
Yep. And then if we edit this, you can go to JWT and we can see the access tokens, signing tokens, the default signing key. So we can go look that up in Keymaster, which is under settings.
Okay, so we can find out our algorithm here. So HS256, which tends to kind of be the default anyway. So if we come back over here, I'd already kind of written that one in, but we have to go find that secret. So under settings, you say?
Yep. So just above reports, settings, and then scroll down to Keymaster. And I think you can, wherever the default signing key is.
Looks for the 256.
I think we want the one that's not the
or the
one.
Yeah, sorry, it's the HS default signing key. Okay.
Yep. So I think click view, and there's the secret.
Yep. Click here to reveal. Nobody copy this. Don't want you all to access my free dad joke API. All right. Let me get all up there. All right.
All right. So from here, we want to, actually, I think you want that JWT.decode to happen below the if not token on line 23, 24.
Well, we do need to kind of decode this to find out whether it's valid or not.
Right, but if it's not present at all, do we want to try to decode it?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. Yep. Okay. So then we could check if it's not valid at this point. Then what do we do from
here? Or not JSON, right? Essentially.
Yep. If it's so we'll get our unpacked payload here. Oops. Spell things correctly. All right. So what we want to check in here is what that payload's going to look like. And we already saw that from jwt.io. I kept that open. I closed it. Let me go paste that back in. So we have the header and we have the payload.
Yep. So the header typically just gets handled by the library, right? Like you can check the library settings, but the payload is what you really want to check, which is and things you want to check for are making sure that you know who the audience is, that I mean, in this particular case, you might want to check that you are, that they're actually requesting the joke permission, not other permission.
Right.
Again, a little bit overkill in a one API, one call API, but in a more complicated API, you might want to do that.
Okay. So we're just going to unpack the decoded thing here. We're going to look at permissions, make sure that, whichever permission key is in here, that it says joke or something like that.
Yeah, and that B92D, that is you. That is the dad joke API. If we go back and look at FusionAuth, that's the entity ID, I believe, of that entity.
So if we come back up here and go to entity management, go to entities, we see the dad joke API is that. So I could put this in my code just as a verification of, let's call it like FusionAuth entity ID is equal to that. And then we can check that that actually existed in the permissions. And if it did and it's set to joke, then, you know, we know that everything is on the up and up here.
Right.
Cool. All right. So what we're looking for inside our JSON Web Token then is this permissions key. And we expect that to be an object. We expect the key in that object to match that ID. We expect that to be an array that contains joke.
And you also might want to check, I mean, just a few other things that people often check are the issuer, because that is who created this JSON Web Token. So right now it's acme.com because that's what we set by default. But
okay,
you know, you might want to check that it's not somebody else, because anyone can use to generate these. Right now,
sure,
they probably aren't going to have the same secret, so that'll be a safety measure. But
right.
And then the audience is the other one, the AUD claim, which is I think the first one. Might be scrolled a little bit.
Oh, there it goes. Yep.
Which again, you can see is the same. It's the B92 because this is
yeah.
Who should be interested in this token, and if it's not me,
Gotcha.
then I don't want to do anything with it.
Okay, let's start building in some of those checks in here. So we want to say if AUD not in unpacked payload, or permissions not in unpacked payload, then we can send back. In this case, it could be like a 403 because you're not permitted.
Right.
We'll just say like bad access or something like that. Otherwise, we can double check that we know that we have both the audience and the permissions. So now we can say if unpacked payload audience is not equal to our FusionAuth entity ID, or our FusionAuth entity ID is not in our unpacked payload permissions, then that means it wasn't a key inside of here. Then we can also send back, no funny for you. Otherwise, we can check, now that we know that all of that has passed, now we can say if joke is in unpacked payload permissions FusionAuth entity ID. So because this is coming back as a list of things, we're going to check that this string exists in that list. And if that worked out okay, we're going to give you back a joke. Or actually what I'll do is we'll kind of keep it the same pattern here and say if it's not in there, then we'll also send you back that 403. So lots of gatekeeping happening here before we'll let you access something funny. All right, how's that looking?
That looks great to me, and obviously that would be a great thing to extract out to like a library or function that you were gonna,
for sure,
run this across multiple different.
Yeah, and what I would be more likely to do in Python is like build this as a decorator or something like that for like, you know, what I should or shouldn't have access to. All right, so let me go deploy that again on Google Cloud. Already built it once, so it should go a little bit faster this time, I hope. But I think it's still gonna like try to rebuild the container and so on. So we'll let that stew for a minute, and then we'll go give that a shot. Just taking a look at chat. Got a handful of folks. Thanks for hanging out with us today. DeQuantrius says, I applied for a Postman job for business operations analyst. Cool. Good luck. Hope that goes well. We got Blaze Pabong. Want to try this on my Python portfolio site? Yeah, that'd be great. Having a portfolio site would be a good way to restrict like who can actually access things. You might not want to make that too restrictive, though. If if you're trying to apply for a job or something like that, you probably want that to be fairly open so that anybody can find your portfolio. But definitely things that you want to keep secret, and you only want to give specific people specific access to specific things. Something like FusionAuth, this interface makes total sense. Like coming in here and adding your entities and adding what you have access to or not. Is pretty straightforward, and now I don't have to build all that into my code, which is great. All I have to do is check, does the person coming in who claims to have this authentication, do they have the right access? So the other thing, while we're waiting for that to compile, then is we need to go make a call over to this endpoint where now we send in that authentication header. So I'm going to duplicate the old one that didn't have auth, and now we're going to do one with auth. So we're going to say get a joke with auth. So what we want to do here is we want to send over that authorization header. So in this case, we'll probably do like a bearer token, and that token is going to come from our environment. And what we can do here is we can just use that access token directly from our environment, and it's just going to go ahead and build that and send that in as our authentication.
So the only feedback I have there is you might not want to use bearer token, because I think that puts bearer.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. See, we just want like
API key. Maybe?
API key, yeah. And then the key was going to be authorization, and the value again was just going to be FA access token, and we'll add that to our header. Awesome. You can also add it to query params if you choose, but we'll add it in there. Yeah, good call on that, Dan. Cool. Well, we can try and call this without and see what happens. So we got a 401 unauthorized. So no funny haha for you, no access. So our code deployed down here, and now it's kind of blocked behind getting this authentication. And if we send this over with our authorization, we got invalid audience. So we got a JSON Web Token exception called invalid audience. So if we go over to the preview mode, we'll see a little bit nicer call stack. So looks like we ran into an issue here where it's trying to unpack that.
So we never specified that. So that's actually something from the library.
Yeah, that looks like Flask is taking care of that for us. So it found the secret. Trying to figure out what we need here. This is kind of a really long output here.
Yeah.
All right, so here's a copy paste friendly version of the traceback. All right, that's a little bit easier. So invalid audience. So the audience was coming in with that B92 code that we were expecting before, but it looks like this is actually validating that audience as part of. Well, no, that's actually coming in from the JSON Web Token library, not from Flask.
Yeah. So it looks like there's a way you can like have it validate the audience for you and the issuer for you,
Sweet.
rather than you having to do it. So
okay.
If you go to the API doc of that PyJBOT,
pull it over here.
Yep. So it's not in the example usage, but I found it in the API reference section.
Audience claim. Oh yeah, looks like we can actually specify that as part of the decode. We can tell it which audience to accept. Use of this claim is optional, and we didn't specify it. Oh, interesting. I wonder if it's optional because you may not get it in the payload. So we might have to go specify this in the decode specifically, in which case we don't have to do these other checks here. And we'll just check the actual payload itself. So when we do the decode in here, we'll do audience equals, and then this looks like it was an array of those strings, so that'll be our FA entity ID. If I read that documentation correctly, it would be an array of strings.
I think you need verify underscore auth as well. It's weird. Again, if you look at the API reference, there's actually a section on decoding there. If you scroll down, right under digital signature algorithms on the left-hand side. Yeah, you gotta scroll down a little further. There's the API reference in the black.
Oh, digital signature.
Oh, but no, we want the API reference, which is below it.
Okay.
And then if you go to the decode section, it has more information.
All right, so we got our algorithm, we got the key, we got algorithms, and then the options. Okay, so it looks like we can verify.
Yeah, so it's weird to me why it appears to be optional, but that our experiment definitely showed it was not optional.
Right. I mean, I like a lot of this stuff, like verify that the expiration is in the future and stuff like that. Okay, so we'll add that in there. But what is verify signature?
I do not know.
Let's see. From...
Oh, I think it's supposed to be true, maybe? That's weird. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll try it.
Yeah.
What's the worst that'll happen? Someone's also mentioning in chat we could also use PySnooper.
Oh.
Have a quick peek at this. So PySnooper. You can see all the attributes. It'll automatically guess how to expand the expression. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's kind of clever. So that's for like peeking into like deeply nested structures, it looks like. Cool. I'm gonna have to check that one out a little later. Cool. Let's go redeploy this. Here's how long that takes. I think it's only about a minute or so. But yeah, the documentation on that is a little weird, that it makes it sound like it's optional, but it was blocking us on that. Unless there's something else in that payload that indicates that it shouldn't be bypassed, or it shouldn't be skipped. But all we have in here is the scope. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, it is coming up saying it's an invalid signature. Oh, that's because I didn't put my my private key in here. So the other nice thing about this site is if I put in that private key, and it basically says like, yeah, it verified that, you know, nothing got tampered with, basically. All right, let's see. Still working on it. We added that other library, so it might take a minute to all that stuff in here. How you doing on time there, Dan?
Good, yeah, I'm good.
All right. Well, hello to everybody else hanging out in chat. So I'm Ian. I'm a developer advocate at Postman, and I got Dan Moore with me here. He's a buddy that lives up in Boulder, not too far from me. And he's the head of DevRel over at FusionAuth, and we're seeing how to add FusionAuth to limit access to an API. We're kind of tinkering in all things API and authentication today, and playing around with FusionAuth a little bit to try to see how do we build in these entities and scopes to limit access to our dad joke API here, and see if we can get this deployed and test it again here real quick.
While we were waiting, one of my coworkers was a student at Turing and said Ian was one of the coolest teachers. So I just want to give you a
Oh, it's
little
good
bit
to
of
hear.
props
It's
for
good to
that.
hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I pay them well to say that. So no, it's good to hear. Yeah, I really enjoyed my time as an instructor. It was a lot of fun. All right, so that got deployed. Took 2.5 minutes to deploy each time. That's a good benchmark to remember. All right, so if we go back over to Postman then, we'll try sending that over again. Hey, we got a joke that time. Sweet.
Awesome.
All right, so if we go into pretty mode or raw mode, principal asks the student, do you have a stutter? No, my dad has a stutter. Yeah. Guy registered my name as a jerk. Nice. Lance isn't a common name these days, but in medieval times they were called Lance a lot.
Awesome.
These are great jokes. Playing chess with a friend, he said, let's make it interesting. So we stopped.
Burn.
Good times. All right, so
where are these jokes sourced from? Is my question. Did you come up with all these, or did you just
no.
find a
No, I
repository?
found some online source, and I basically just dumped them all into a JSON file. And so there's like a couple hundred of them in here, and so it's just randomly picking one and just echoing it back out. So
nice.
Yeah, like when does a joke become a dad joke? When it becomes apparent.
That's great. Sorry,
Yeah.
cut you off. What were you gonna say?
No worries. So we got it working. So so as far as those other entities go, like just trying to think of like other types of scoping here. So the entities that we added here were just to access the jokes, but the entities that we added here, one was for who's calling the API, and the other is me as the API. When we get into the entity types, this is where we're specifying what you're allowed to do with the API. Is that right? This is where you get into like the roles.
Yeah, so this is where you define permissions. So
Okay.
you could imagine that you might use this if you're using FusionAuth heavily. You might have APIs that are managed via this, and so you have an API entity type which has. You can actually go back and add permissions if you go to the key. I think it's the key icon.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So you could add 1,000 permissions here, right?
Gotcha.
Or you might say, actually, I'm going to have APIs that are managed by Team 1, which has their own set of permissions. Team 2 has their own set.
Oh,
or you might say, I have APIs, and then I also have like servers, or I have servers is maybe a bad example. I have devices, right? Like I have devices out in the real world, and they have their own set of permissions that are going to be managed there, and then you can create entities that basically inherit from either API or device.
Gotcha. Can you have multiple teams that have kind of sort of overlapping permissions? Like if I've got a finance team that is allowed to go in and set billing and read billing information, that kind of thing, and then I've got like maybe my accounts receivable group, they have to be able to go in and read that data but not access that, but they also need access to other areas. Can somebody be part of like multiple teams to get different kinds of permissions, or like how easily is that kind of stuff set up?
Yeah, so can we go ahead and create another API?
Sure.
Or no, we don't have to create the whole thing, just create it in FusionAuth.
Yep.
Called let's call it mom jokes or something like, well, maybe not mom jokes, that might be a bad idea. We call it knock knock jokes.
So we're going to do that at an entity level or entity type?
Because it's another API, right? So
okay.
Or do you want to model out the scenario you just laid out with finance? We could do
I'm thinking like just something a little more real world that folks might run into.
Sure. So let's add a finance API, right?
Okay.
And make it an API, and then let's add a accounts receivable API. And then let's add accounts receivable caller and a finance caller.
Okay. And we specify these as API as well?
Yep.
For
you could create your own type to call the caller or something like that, because you can cross allow them, but it's easier to do.
Okay. So then this will be our finance caller.
Cool.
All right.
And then let's go ahead and go back to APIs real quick, or sorry, entity types, and let's add one more permission, which is, or let's add two more, which is read and write.
Okay.
It's that key, because let's not add an entity type, let's add it to the API entity type.
Oh, inside of here.
Yep.
We'll add read.
Cool.
Okay,
so now if we go back to the entities, we can go to the accounts receivable caller and manage the grants there. So that's the black button.
Okay.
And let's add them the ability to write and read to the accounts receivable API, but only read from the finance API. So yeah, you want to search for the entity type or the entity here. So AR.
Oh, gotcha.
Or accounts receivable. Actually,
yeah,
I don't think we want ourselves. We want the accounts receivable. So go to add. Sorry. There we are.
Okay. Oh, cool. Oh, neat. Then we say, okay, so as accounts receivable, you can read the data, but maybe you can't write.
Or maybe give them write on this one, but read on the other one. Because you can have grants against multiple APIs, right? Or multiple entities. So yeah.
All right. So we'll give you a read write on that one. And then
let's add one more grant.
This will be our finance API.
Yep.
It's like we have to type in at least a few letters in here for that autocomplete. Yep. And then maybe they can read the finance API, but they can't write data to that.
Exactly. Yep. And we can do the same thing with the account with the finance folks, right? The finance caller. They can probably write to everything because they're, the CFO or whatever.
Right. So that would be the finance caller. We go into manage. Yep. And in here, we can go to the finance API and they get read write to that one. Mm-hmm. But then on the accounts receivable, they only get read access.
Sure.
Wow, that's cool.
Huh. And so, you're doing a lot of clicking around here, right? Which is fine for exploring. But again, we have APIs for all this, so you can script all this in any of the languages we support, or via curl API, right? So you could drive this all with Postman if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And then
I'm just thinking about like other like employee management portal software, having some sort of tie-in that when I add somebody new and they get added to this team, it automatically grants them these permissions and things like that they can immediately start hitting other areas of other software based on these grants that we're giving them right here.
Yep. And you get one place where you kind of manage it all, right? Like that's the win is you could totally do this in code everywhere, but then it would be like spaghetti to be like, oh, we just added a fourth permission. How do I make sure I know who gets access to this permission? Well, if you do it all in one central location, you can.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty neat. Realized our chat window here got a little bit limited. Yeah.
Hey, Blaze. I know Blaze. Thanks for sharing that PySnooper thing. That's awesome.
Seems like the entities would be the integration point to an AuthZ tool like OSO.
It's a great question. So I would say the entities are probably more of a replacement or kind of a choice between OSO and entity management because they give you those fine-grained permissions. What OSO and other tools like Kerbos, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, I've worked with some of them and they give you more attribute-based access control. So that's where you don't just have like a request information, but you actually have the request, but you also have like the time that it happened or other things like that. So if you had, and this is a situation we've actually recommended to some people, if you have a situation where you say, Dan has access to employees, but only employees that he manages,
right?
Versus Dan has access to all employees. That's where a more, how do I put this? Kind of a standalone authorization server like OSO or Kerbos would be a good fit.
Gotcha. Yeah. I wonder, is there anything sort of time limited that could help against like data breaches and whatever? Like Dan can access finance data, but only between 9 and 5 from this range of IP addresses. Like, could we limit it, within that, very limited scope that you've got to have like very specific access and I'm thinking of like bank vaults and kind of things. Like the bank vault's only open between this hour and this hour, and like that's your window of opportunity to get in there and like, you know, get the cash drawer or whatever for working at the bank. Yeah, I'm curious about that kind of stuff now.
Yeah.
Tangents, go off on tangents. Be here all day going through auth stuff. So yeah, that was really straightforward as far as like building out those teams. And you mentioned you've got your own API for these that you're kind of like you mentioned, we can kind of script this stuff up to say like when we hire somebody new, we want to put them on this team, and that automatically means we're going to grant them such and such permissions and so on. And then it looks like we can come in here and we can add users. Now, are these users who would access my API, like my joke API, or are these users that are part of my organization that have access to come in and add other entities and scopes and so on?
Either one.
Oh, really?
So if you go to users, you can, do you want to add a new user real quick? So you can, yeah, so if you just put in an email and don't click send email, set password, just choose one. And if you just click don't click the send email, yeah, just check that, yeah, and then put in, I don't know, anything. You're not going to log in as this user, so
yeah. Cool.
And yeah, and then click save, and then if we go to that user screen, you can see that we can actually grant this user permissions on entities.
Grants. Okay.
Yeah, if you click add real quick, you can search for finance or.
Oh, so we can even give them granular access, like, you know, I want to give them read and write access to both of those APIs. They're not necessarily limited to, they are part of this team, therefore they only get these permissions. You can actually go in and fine tune these per user.
Yep.
Very cool.
And then, but you also can add them to what we call applications, which are really things you log into. And FusionAuth itself is one of those. So you can kind of mix and match what need. Blaze, that's a great point. I think that you can do pretty interesting things with entity grants, but if you want to go to ABAC, attribute-based access control, you're going to want to go to something like OSO or Kerbos. Yep. I don't know, Ian, if we have time, we can actually show driving the FusionAuth API via Postman too, because it has a REST API, if you'd be interested.
Looks like someone named Joshua has made a workspace for testing FusionAuth. Do you have like a workspace or a collection at an organization level in Postman? If not, you should.
Not that I know of. Yeah, I guess we have not, unfortunately.
Yeah, you should. We've got 20 million users on our platform. They would love to find your API. Yeah, but let's tinker with that a little bit more. Let me go back to
that. Actually, that's a really good question because of the way we deploy, we don't have like a single endpoint for our APIs, right? We don't like, you have your own, and when I tear yours down, it's going to be gone. But every client has their own. Like, is there an easy way to represent that in Postman? Should we do that against like a sandbox environment, or what's the right way to do that when we have an endpoint?
Yeah, what some other teams have done, like just to get in and start tinkering with it, is you have like a sandbox that's limited. We have a couple of companies, for example, they'll set up like some sample credentials where if I fork your collection into my workspace, I have a limited amount of access that I can do something with. You know, I think of like PayPal, for example. They've got their setup where you can literally fork their collection. You can just start hitting send and it'll like grab dummy data and whatever. But you can also like write new data, like pretend you're writing into an inventory system that you're adding an inventory category, and now you're adding items to that category. And now when you fetch that list of categories, you see what everybody else in the world is like adding to their thing. And then overnight they refresh it. And so every day it's like brand new and sort of cleaned out. The downside with that is if you get a whole bunch of people hitting it, if you access it sort of later in the day, it's out of API calls and you can start getting rate limited, and now you can't do anything with their API. Other groups, they say like, here's how you can get started, and you just need this one little API, and it's going to kind of get you up and running. Now, in the case of FusionAuth, where I needed to have like my, Ian the postman.fusionauth.io, you could pull that in as an environment variable. And so you could, for example, as part of your collection with it, like for FusionAuth, you could say, this is what you need to go set. So you would write that in your documentation, like you need to go build an environment variable, you need to call it this, you need to set it to that, like here's where to go get that from FusionAuth. And now that you've got that, now you can go hit send on all these things, and it'll like start reading and writing all that stuff.
Makes sense.
That would probably be the easiest way, and it requires a lot of really good documentation where you just come in and you highlight like step 1, go over to FusionAuth, log in, get that initial subdomain kind of thing, come back in here, add an environment, call the variable this, paste in this value, and then you're good to go. Gotcha. So it's just a real quick setup kind of thing that you could do.
Awesome.
Yep. Cool. Okay. So yeah, how do you? How much time have you got? Like, do you want to tinker with FusionAuth as API calls here?
I'd say another 30 or 40 minutes would be fine with me if you got time.
Yeah, sounds good. Epicat in chat says Auth feels complicated. It can. I think once you work with it a little bit, it's not as bad. What's interesting is when you think about Auth, are you talking authentication or are you talking authorization? Because those are two different things. One's who are you, and the other one's what are you allowed to do. And they're two very separate things. So when Dan and I first started streaming today, we were talking about who is your identity provider and what are they providing. And it's just, yep, this is Ian. Ian has logged in successfully with Google. Here's a token that proves Ian has logged in with Google. And you can kind of call back to Google and verify that Ian really did log in and so on. Authorization is really, okay, well, now that I've got that token, what can I do on Ian's behalf? Can I go access his email? Can I access his calendar? Can I go, whatever, access his Google Photos or whatever? Like, what can you do now that you have that authentication happening? And so authorization seems 10 times as complicated. It can, yeah, because you can get so fine-tuned and very granular around. You can read this API endpoint, you can write to that API endpoint, you can, because you've got read, write, delete, like all your CRUD endpoints, basically, like create, read, update, delete. You could build very granular controls into like every part of an API or part of an application. Like you can go read the finance data, like you can go read the billing information, but you can't set a new credit card or anything like that. Or you can't read the credit card details, but you can go write a new, expense report, but you can't add other kinds of data or whatever. So it can get very complicated as far as what you're allowed to do. I remember writing authorization tables in databases where you're setting all these little bits of like, if they've got this bit and this bit and this bit, then they're allowed to access this or that. Something like FusionAuth just makes a lot more intuitive sense where you can say, I've got this API, these are the entities, these are the entity types, and sort of cross-linking those and then specifying at a user level, Ian is allowed to hit this, but not this. He can hit this, but not that. And going in and setting those at a per user level or at a team level is what Dan was describing. Like you can have a finance team that by default get these permissions, and then you can go in and you can kind of fine tune them per user beyond that.
I mean, one thing I would say that I think that was a really good overview, and the only thing I'd add is that in my experience, authentication is not typically super tied up with business logic, right? Like it is kind of a binary thing, but authorization is really tied up with business logic because every application is different, and like every piece of functionality, you need to control access to it, but it's determined by the business requirements. And so that's why I think authorization seems more complicated. At the end of the day, it's about getting the information to the decision point that it needs to give a yes or no answer, but the kind of information is way more multidimensional than authentication is.
Yeah, especially as we saw too, that going in and adding a user, you can add them to a team, but you can also give them very granular permission. Like even though Ian's part of the finance team, I really want to give Ian these extra permissions to access such and such, or I want to turn off other kinds of access and so on.
But yeah,
hey, RC Maniac, good to see you in chat.
To Blaze's point, like like SailPoint and some other customers have built like billion-dollar businesses on enterprise Auth. Like it is a big deal, because if you have the wrong authorization, or Dan had the right authorization for his current job, but like moved to a different position and didn't get his authorization revoked,
Oh yeah.
it turns into, you know, a real nightmare. So
Yeah. Yep.
yeah. Cool.
Good
Do you want
deal.
to do a little bit of Postman workspace on the API, and then we can kind of wrap?
Sure. Sounds good.
Cool.
All right. So how should we get started here? We'll make a new folder here, and we'll just call this FusionAuth. Yeah. How do we want to get started in here? What kinds of APIs can we hit?
So we have an open API spec.
Oh, that's even better.
It's experimental. I just want to, you know, so I'll be very interested to see how it performs. So let's do this.
Okay.
If you go to the FusionAuth docs, cool, and just go to full documentation, that big green button. Cool, and go to developer guide, and then client libraries, and there's open API right there.
Oh, sweet.
And if you click on that, it takes you over to a GitHub, or actually you guys can grab the specification right there.
Perfect. So what we can do in Postman is we can come over here and we can say, I want to import from a URL, from a link, and we can paste that in here, continue, and it automatically detects that as OpenAPI 3.0. We can import it as documentation. Two hours later.
We basically were API first, so everything gets an API. So that I think it's 15,000, 15K or something like that in size. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a pretty big file for sure. Yeah, it's going to take a minute to import here. But this is also a good stress test on Postman too. Yeah, that's beefy for sure. All right. So basically what we've done is if we now have a draft implementation of your entire API inside of here. Awesome. And your team has actually done a really good job, like even putting in examples, which means because we have examples for all of these, by the way, these all automatically got built as a collection for us as well. Because you have examples for all those, you could spin up a mock server. And now you can actually develop against a mock server where when you hit a specific endpoint in a specific way, it's going to give you back that specific example as well. And so you could actually be up and running without actually hitting the real FusionAuth server in that
scenario.
For
exploring the API? Is that why you use a mock server?
For playing with it a little bit, yeah. Like if I was worried about like API call limits and things like that, or like, you know, can I access this point, or is this one going to be paid? Like, what if I want to build against it and see how easy it is to use before I start paying FusionAuth for accessing it? You know, I can start building against the mock server and see what those responses are like, and kind of like start picking apart the data and so on, to realize like, oh yeah, this is something that we should use, we should pay for this, and now we can go like turn that feature on and start paying you for it. But this way we would get to play with that a little bit ahead of time. So yeah, so it already detected like what kind of authorization is needed. We need an auth, we need an API key.
Do you want me to get you one? I mean, you can go to your FusionAuth instance and get one if you'd like.
Yeah, I can just go grab one from over there. Let's go over to here.
So settings and then API keys. So one thing that's worth noting here is that all of our APIs like have this kind of fine-grained permission.
Oh wow! Yeah,
it's basically CRUDL, right? Like so lots of times people want to put an API key into like a mobile app, and we say, okay, it's not the best idea, but we understand why, and then just lock it down. If you don't select any of these, then it's a super user, basically.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I'm also thinking of like the implication of having all these little like slider buttons, you know, this many for this many calls. Yeah. You know, it's a lot of data to sort of track on a form, but
Yeah.
Cool. So if we leave it as is, I'm a super user.
Yep. One other point is there's actually an API to create API keys if you wanted. So
Yeah, I saw that one.
yeah, cool. There you are.
Cool. Let's go grab that key and we'll come back over to here. And again, we could put this in an environment variable up here. So I'm just going to go over to my environment and we'll call this like all access pass. And we'll just set in that current value. And so if we keep it a secret, then it masks everything here, by the way. And another thing that I often say on live streams is don't put things like this in initial value. Anything that you put in initial value will synchronize to the Postman servers. And if you're working on a public workspace or a public API, anybody can come in here and click that eyeball and unmask what's in the initial value. Anything you put in your current value is stored within this environment. So in this case, I'm in the desktop application. And so this current value is stored within my desktop application. If I switch over to the browser, it doesn't have access to that current value because the browser has its own current value as well. And so it's a way to keep everything like as sandboxed as possible, even from your own team, where you'd have other channels to share those API keys or whatever to access from there.
So initial value is shared across environments. Or
initial value gets synchronized to Postman, so anybody that can access this environment has access to that value. Because we also allow you to fork environments now. So if I built this out as like, or let's say you build this out, you're head of your department, you build this out, other people can come in and they can fork this down. Now they've got a copy, they can actually make a pull request back to you and you can merge all that stuff in, and other people can pull down those changes. So we've got the full kind of Git workflow inside of here too, as far as like forking and merging pull requests and so on.
Yep. Is that all within the Postman like UX, or is that like out to other?
It's all inside. Oh, wow. Yeah, cool. It's all inside here.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yep. And so now your team can come in and you can basically plan out your whole thing. You can actually synchronize this back and forth with integrations like GitHub and GitLab and Bitbucket and so on. You can come in and synchronize this. But from an API level, I can go into the draft version. I can go over to that definition. There's your definition file. And I can come in and I can start tweaking it right here, and it'll start, changing all of these things. I tell it to generate a new collection. It'll build a whole new collection. You can do contract testing, like all this stuff. My favorite feature is over here. Now we can code generate because you're on OpenAPI 3.0. If you come in and you've just defined this out and you're like, all right, now we want to go build our API. Well, now we can, you want it in Python and Flask, or do you want it in Go using the Chi server code, and it'll actually start building out some framework code for your team to actually then go build your API. And it'll scaffold some code for you.
That's server side stuff, right? That's
the server side code. Okay, that's the server side code now. Yeah.
So it's super powerful if you're like just defining your API, you can really easily iterate on server side code. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you need to change the URL there out of curiosity? Like the URL is pointing to a local server, but you could put in the Ian.
Yeah. So when we go over to the collection and we look at any of these endpoints, by default it just sets this thing to base URL. But when I hover over it, we see that it got set to localhost, and this is at a collection level. So we click on the collection up here. We go to variables, and then you can change the base URL to whatever we want. Cool. In this case, we just change this to be like the postman.auth.io.
I think it's dashes, and I think you
was it dashes?
Yeah, I think you need HTTPS too, don't you?
Yep.
Probably. Cool.
So I can save that, and now when I go back to that endpoint and I hover over it, we see that the current value then is going to be Ian the Postman.
Nice.
Spelled FusionAuth wrong, so let me go fix that.
And I'd love to see just get users, right? Because we know we have some users in there.
Yeah.
So you should be able
to. Let's see. That won't be under family, I imagine. Just retrieve user.
I think you can. If you retrieve users, you should be able to do that.
Okay. So what we do as part of the import is we realize from your documentation that you had things like an email and a login ID, and it was a string value. So we just populate it with like random Latin lorem ipsum kind of stuff. And so we don't necessarily know what all of these things are supposed to be, but they all get turned on by default. But I imagine that these are going to be like filtering, because you do add descriptions on like this is the email of the user. So if I wanted to filter down to a specific user, I could. But let's do it. So we got unauthorized. So something didn't work as far as the authentication. So we can go take a peek at that.
Yeah.
This is also telling us that you've got some validation in here that tells us that that what we were expecting back didn't match. Sure. But that's another thing for another day. So let's go figure out what happened with our authentication. We come back over here, go to our authorization. Oh, we didn't put in the right API key. So this is where we can.
In the environment, we just forgot to change it to.
Yeah, we forgot to change it here. Yep. So we'll change that. We'll come back over here and hit send. All right, you get request is missing a user ID or a URL, so we have to specify something in here. So we'll set the email, and we'll set this over to ian.douglas@iandouglas.com. Hopefully it's not going to be case sensitive. And there it is. There's my user. And we're up and running. Yep.
Awesome. That's great. Cool. Well, gosh, that was a whirlwind, man.
But super easy, like import that open API spec, and now people can tinker with your API. They can go, access any of these API endpoints that they have permission from your side to actually go do based on that API key. So all you would need to do on your side in the collection is add documentation in here, because the only documentation you've really got is like, on the documentation panel here, you don't have any. So we would have to go in and like actually add some documentation, like here's how to actually go get the API key that you need. Here's how to set it. Maybe show like some screenshots of, as you build up the key, these are different things that you can set or unset, or just set this, sort of God mode sort of API all access token kind of thing. And, kind of, just document some of that a little bit more. But other than that, you're up and running. Like people can come in here and they can start tinkering right away with the whole API that you've got, because you've got that open API spec. Makes it super easy for users to come in and play around.
Right. Awesome. I'm taking it to do right now.
Sweet. This isn't a Postman collection, but you can import this into Postman. Yeah. So that's what we grabbed, Robot Dan. So, or are you Robot Dan? Someone else on your team, Robot Dan?
Someone else on my team, yeah.
Oh, sweet. Awesome. Cool. Good to have other FusionAuth folks around. So yeah, it's great, like just having that enormous spec. I mean, the thing's gigantic, but yeah, 15,000 lines. Look at that. But I mean,
break that up? Do you think that would make more sense, or do you think that, I mean, this is the API, right?
I mean, this is the full scoped API that you want your users to have access to. Then yeah, I would keep everything in there. But yeah, you can definitely add a lot more documentation up here at the top as part of the Open API spec. And the URL in here, I would say it's probably fine to leave as localhost, but as part of the documentation, you'd say like, hey, once you get your actual like personalized URL, you want to like set it as a collection variable or an environment variable, and like document kind of those steps that we went through to get up and running. And now they can hit your API and they can start tinkering with it for real.
Awesome. Cool.
Yep. Quick and simple.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And it's quick and simple because your team made an open API spec. If you didn't have that, then we'd be going in and we'd be manually adding all those things of like, let's go look up the documentation, let's pull that thing over, or using the curl commands, because your documentation had curl commands in there. We could just copy and paste those curl commands and it would go generate those collection requests. But because you've got the open API spec, it did all that for us, and it just slurped everything in, and now we've got a full working collection over here that we can tinker with.
That's awesome.
Yeah, kudos to you and your team for putting that together.
Cool. No, I mean, I can already see there's places where we can absolutely improve it, but it's great to see the power of that. So yeah. I love Open API. It's really cool.
And Robot Dan's giving you shout outs for making the Open API spec. So good on you for that.
Awesome.
Sweet. Well, it was super easy to add that into my little joke API. So hopefully everybody got some enjoyment out of seeing some goofy jokes along the way. But yeah, Dan, thanks for letting me hang today and go through this. It was really interesting to kind of see how the entities kind of played out and how that came in as a JSON web token, and unpacking that stuff and seeing, what do we have access to as we're kind of unpacking what's coming in that request, and seeing all the granularity of what that user has access to and so on. So yeah, it was really neat to be able to.
Well, And I appreciated, you bringing the Postman stuff in, right, and seeing how easy that tool is,
Right.
both from the interaction piece and then the open API piece. So that was really eye-opening for me too. So that was great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Cool deal. All right. Well,
right.
thanks everyone for hanging out. I'm going to go grab some lunch and got a bunch of other work I got to get done today. But thanks for hanging out today. Good to see you again, Dan. We'll grab a coffee soon.
Sounds good. Bye.
All right. See ya.